On today's podcast, I'm going to be talking about Donald Trump, his trials, historic connections that I've been reading about to other trials of politicians in the past, and who the actual corrupt politician is. It's not Donald Trump. All that and more on Bennett's Slice of Life. Hit it. Thanks for coming and listening to the podcast today. This is going to be a Trump-centered episode, so if you're not a fan of Donald Trump, this may not be the episode for you today. I was recently reading an article online that compared trials that Donald Trump is going with the Boss Tweed trials of the 19th century. Now, for those who don't know, William Tweed, a.k.a. Boss Tweed, was a Tammany Hall politician. Tammany Hall in New York City was a Democratic Party club founded by Martin Van Buren. It started out, it was basically a social club, and eventually it became more politically affiliated. Now, Boss Tweed was a member of this, and he was also a businessman and had a lot of connection to important individuals in New York City politics. If you've seen the movie Gangs of New York, Jim Broadbent, the actor Jim Broadbent, played Boss Tweed in that film very, very well, as a matter of fact, although he didn't quite look like him. Boss Tweed was bearded. He had a beard and a mustache. He was balding, and he was overweight, but not nearly as obese as Thomas Nast's cartoons were of him. Thomas Nast was a cartoonist, political cartoonist, who did political cartoons for newspapers in New York, and he always made Tweed look very, very obese, much more than he really was. So the thing with Boss Tweed is he ran in his ward, what they now today call election districts, were once called wards, W-A-R-D, wards. Boss Tweed ran a position as a Democratic boss of his ward, and then eventually ran for the state assembly, winning that. Being part of the state assembly now, he had control over building projects in New York City and how they would be funded, and who would be involved in, being contracted to work on those building projects. The current building that is now called the Tweed Courthouse, which is behind City Hall on Chambers Street, New York, that was built by Boss Tweed and his cronies, which is why it's called the Tweed Courthouse. I don't know if they call it that more. I don't think they call it that in honor of Boss Tweed. I think they call it that because he was affiliated with building it. Because this guy was so politically corrupt that there's no reason why anybody would want to honor this guy by naming something after. But it is called the Tweed Courthouse, so that's what I'll refer to it. Now, Boss Tweed took payoffs and created a construction firm that bidded on city and state building contracts when they were building a courthouse in New York or some public improvement project. Boss Tweed's contracting company would bid on that. And even though there's a clear conflict of interest because he's the owner of it or a shareholder of it, they would win the contract because Boss Tweed was involved in being one of the people who would influence the people who would select the bidder or outright pick the contractor. And then, of course, his contracting firm would then pay kickbacks. Even if he didn't own the contracting firm, a lot of firms would agree to pay him kickbacks if he got the committee that was overseeing the building of something to choose that firm. Very often the buildings that were slated to cost in 1880s and 90s dollars, $1 million or $2 million, they would eventually be cost overruns, and these buildings would cost $10 or $20 million, which is a horrendously exorbitant sum in the 1880s and 90s. I mean, that's billions of dollars today. And Boss Tweed would get a cut out of all of that money that was paid to the contracting firms to build the building. And he had a series of cronies that he worked with, and the bribes flowed, the liquor flowed, party connections flowed. And he was in power for not a very long time, maybe about 10 or 15 years, I think. But he racked up multi-millions of dollars for himself in that time before he was ousted from his position and they held a trial. First trial ended up in hung jury because Tweed somehow got to the jurors and was able to bribe them or manipulate them. Eventually, he did get convicted and he went to jail and he died shortly after. But his name is forever indelibly linked in New York history and in the politics of New York. And in fact, when a reformer mayor came to power in New York, which was Fiorello LaGuardia in the 1930s, the Tweed was part of Tammany Hall in the 1880s and 90s, although it existed much, for decades before that. I think Tammany Hall dates back to 1820 or 30, something like that. But because Tammany Hall lasted all the way through until the 1930s, when a Republican mayor named Fiorello LaGuardia, who ran on a fusion ticket, he didn't run necessarily as a Republican. He ran on a fusion ticket with a section of Democratic voters as well as the Republican voters. And they were able to pass laws and kind of root out some of the corruption in New York's politics. And they kind of ended Tammany Hall. The building is still there. It's being used as something different now in New York, but it's right near Union Square. It's this big blocky building, very ornate looking. Last time I was around there, they were working on renovating it, I think, to put stores in it, right near the park. And so the thing is that this person in this article compared the trials that Donald Trump is going through to the William Boss Tweed trials of then. I did put a comment in there because I am a historian and I just happen to be a Trump supporter also. And the person that wrote the article was a historian. So now, just for the record, historians do often disagree. They do often have arguments. There are historians that argue a viewpoint on one issue, and other historians will say that our historian is full of crap and will argue a counter argument. And everybody's got all this evidence and research they've done to support their argument. Sometimes the research done is minimal or faulty and dishonest. That does happen. Like any other business, there are dishonest historians that want to fit a narrative or fit a situation or a historical event to a narrative. Although every historian does have a bias, that's a given. We all, as human beings, we have a point of view which influences the way we perceive information and the way we look at things. And that's a natural bias. I'm not talking about racism or sexism or anything like that. I'm talking about just a natural bias based on our own upbringing, our character, our viewpoints, tradition, culture. We just have natural biases to think certain ways about certain things, and none of the biases are necessarily wrong. They're existing when a historian writes an article or writes a book. There is an inherent bias, even if it's a small one. It's a very rare piece of writing that a historian writes that is completely objective without some small bias or point of view being injected into the piece by the author, because the author writes the thing and he researched and writes it from however he feels or his viewpoint on based on what he's seen. So it's impossible. Well, it's not impossible, but it's very improbable that any historical piece of work, fiction or nonfiction, is completely non-biased, telling a completely objective viewpoint or story of the history, getting all the facts accurate and all the sides presented equal. Now, with that said, so this person compared the Trump trials to Boss Tweed's trial. And the comment I made in response to this article was that the historian's argument that there's any similarity between these trials of Donald Trump today and Boss Tweed's from a century ago are in any way similar is a fallacy, and I'll explain why. First of all, Boss Tweed was corrupt. There's no doubt among any historian that would say Boss Tweed was not corrupt. Okay? There is no respectable historian historian today who would say that Boss Tweed was a truly man of the people, that cost overruns and kickbacks he got were for the public benefit. No, they were for his own benefit. However, Donald Trump, despite a lot of people and the public news media and Hollywood, who seems to have created this narrative, crafted this narrative that he's a corrupt individual, there's no proof of that. There's not one shred of evidence to prove that. And these trials are nothing more than a politically motivated witch hunt to try to discredit him, bankrupt him with legal fees, and try to prevent him from running, or if he does run, winning the presidency back in 2024. That's their whole goal. These trials are not based on any major things that Trump has done. They're picking out small, ridiculous things. And in fact, the one trial here in New York where he was ordered to pay something like $460 million in fines, people who don't necessarily support Trump, like Kevin O'Leary, the guy from Shark Tank, he went on. He's not a Trump supporter necessarily. And he went on and said Trump didn't do anything wrong. The banks weren't defrauded, that this is what real estate people do. They get an assessment of their building and they go to the bank with this assessment. It's usually overvaluing of the building because the real estate developer wants to get as much money as they can get their hands on from the bank. And it's the bank's due diligence, which has to then turn around, get their own assessment, see how they think of it. And they'll usually come up with an undervalue. Here's Kevin O'Leary. Listen to his comment.
Well, let's leave out Trump for a minute, and let's leave out politics and just talk about what happens in real estate development anywhere. So if you're a developer and you've got a building on a block anywhere in America and it's worth, let's say, $500 million, and you want to build a building right beside it, you go to the bank and say, this building is worth $500 million. I'd like to borrow a construction finance loan against this asset, and I want you to tell me it's worth $500 million too. And the bank negotiates with you and says, well, no, we think it's worth $400 million, and you fight it out. You're always trying to show your assets in the brightest light with the sunshine you can possibly determine for them. You want them to be worth the very most, because you're only going to get a 40 or 50% loan to value, as it's called. Then you borrow that money. In the case of a $500 million asset, maybe you get $250 million, and you build a new building with a construction finance loan. And so that's what this case is all about. And by the way, forget about Trump. Every single real estate developer everywhere on earth does this. They always talk about their asset being worth a lot, and the bank says no. And that's just the way it is. So in this case, when I'm trying to figure out, and I'm not pro or con, or I don't care about the politics, who lost money? Nobody. The bank got paid back the construction finance loan, and a new building was built. And if you're going to sue this case and win, you got to sue every real estate developer. All they do. This is what they do all day long, every day. So I don't think this thing will ever survive appeal, regardless of what the fine is. This doesn't even make sense.
This is commonly done in all walks of life, not just in real estate, right? Okay, doctors, when you go to a doctor's office and use your medical insurance card to pay for your office visit or your procedure, whatever you're having done, when you get a statement from your medical insurance company saying, here's what the doctor billed us for, here's what we paid him. And you'll notice that the doctors bill for 200% of what the cost of actually is that they want, because they know that the medical insurance company, through contract with them, for him to accept their insurance, he has to accept anywhere from 20% to 60% less than he bills for. So if the doctor wants $100 for the office visit, well, he's going to bill $200 for the office visit, knowing he's only going to probably get 50% of that, which is the 100 he actually wants. Now, the doctors don't disclose what their margin is, what their profit margin is, or what they're looking to collect. All you see as the patient is a receipt or a invoice or a statement from your health insurance that says, here's what they billed us for, here's what we paid. Sometimes that statement is an invoice because you may owe some type of copay or whatever, or the doctor might have made you pay the copay when you walked in the office, and that's usually reflected on there too. So it'll say the doctor wanted $200. He billed $200 to the health insurance. You paid a $25 copay. Then after they knock it down, they paid him $75, right? Which 75 plus your 25 copay is 100. So this is done in all various industries, not just real estate. But so what Donald Trump did was not a crime, and it wasn't even morally wrong. And even the banks that he dealt with testified on his behalf in that trial and said, no, we weren't defrauded. They were trying to the prosecutor was trying to play up the whole thing as like Trump was committing fraud by overvaluing his buildings. And that's not true. Okay, the banks he dealt with even sent representatives to testify on his behalf and said, no, we weren't defrauded. This is what happens. This is what, they come with their viewpoint of how much the property's worth. We take a look at it and we decide what we think the property's worth, and then we meet somewhere in the middle, which is probably what the real estate developer wanted anyway, right? If you're buying or selling a car, the car dealer has a price on the car, and you're foolish if you go into that dealer and agree to pay whatever price is on the sticker of that car. Because car dealers, they love people like you that would go in and say, all right, well, a car costs $25,000. Okay, I'll pay that. No, they love that. See, because that's not actually what the car costs. They overprice the car knowing that you're going to end up negotiating with them and haggling with them. They expect it. It's almost an unwritten law or unwritten rule in dealing with car dealers that you're going to haggle and get the price lower, right? So this is done, and it's perfectly legal. So Trump was sentenced to pay $460 million in fines, which he appealed, and it was reduced to some other lesser amount. But clearly in that case, the judge had a bias because the judge could have chosen to award nothing or $1. But the judge didn't like Trump, so he hits him with the book, throws the book at him, as they say, and makes him pay a fine of $400 million. And the trial in Georgia, where they're trying to convict him on voter fraud or voter intimidation, well, Fani Willis has been completely discredited by Trump's lawyers because they held hearings to show that she was corrupt and was sleeping with and hired her boyfriend, her lover, to work on the case. That's conflict of interest. That's corrupt. That shouldn't be, right? And she tried to hide that fact, and it came out through due diligence of Trump's lawyers. And so that case is probably going to get ruled in the favor of Trump because she's been completely discredited as a prosecuting attorney, and it's been proven that she committed perjury in the witness stand. So she's looking at not only possible jail time and fines, but she may and should, in my opinion, lose her law license to practice law in Georgia. Now, there are other cases going on. There's civil cases, and there are cases all over America. Nobody has been charged as much. There are people in the mafia, the Italian mafia and the mob and gangs and organized crime that have not faced the number of charges that Trump is facing in various courts around our country. The funny part of it is while all the Trump haters out there are like, oh yeah, good. Yeah, he did all these things. Yeah, he's a criminal. He did that. He did this. He did that. Only about 10 years ago, before he ran in 2020, Trump was very popular among the news media and the entertainment set. It's very easy to forget that. It's very easy to forget that 10 to 12 years ago, when Trump had a show called The Apprentice, especially when it went to the Celebrity Apprentice, that celebrities flocked and begged to be on that show for the positive publicity they would get from the show, and the amount that they would win would be donated to a charity of their choice. And in fact, Donald Trump, if you look at his records, and they are public records, is among one of the highest charity donors in the United States. I won't say he's the highest, but he's among the highest. He donates millions and millions of dollars to charity. And every episode and every season of The Apprentice hundreds of thousands of dollars were donated to various charities that the celebrities came there with. Trump didn't discriminate. Any charity they wanted was charity that got the money. There was no question of, well, I don't agree with that charity, so you can't play for that charity. No, didn't matter. Every charity was open and available to get donations. It was just 10 years ago that Trump was a guest host on Saturday Night Live before they got that hack, Alec Baldwin, to do these crude impressions of him. Trump even performed with Megan Mullally, who everyone knows from Will and Grace as Karen with the little pipsqueaky voice, which wasn't a real voice, obviously. But he performed the song from Green Acres, the theme, where he played the Eddie Albert part, completely clad in straw hat, plaid check shirt, overalls, and a pitchfork in his hand. And Megan Mullally played the Ava Gabor role.
Here to sing the theme from Green Acres, please welcome Donald Trump and Will and Grace's Karen Walker.
Is the place to be. Farm living is the life for me. Land spreading out so far and wide. Keep Manhattan, just give me that countryside.
New York is where I'd rather stay. I get allergic smelling hay. Just adore a penthouse view. Darling, I love you. Give me Park Avenue.
George.
The stars.
Fresh air.
Trump Tower.
You are my wife.
Goodbye, city life. Green Acres, we are there.
Yeah, listen to that applause. That's when Donald Trump was the darling of the media set, the elitist in Hollywood. Even among the political set, Democrats and Republicans alike went to Donald Trump for donations and for endorsements and for support. They hugged him and embraced him and spoke with him and hung out with him at big political events and dinners and charity dinners and, all these kind of events where wealthy people go and rub shoulders with celebrities and politicians, right? The power set. They would pose with him for photographs, and a picture is worth 1,000 words. There are photographs of the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, a black organization, giving Trump a Medal of Freedom alongside Rosa Parks, who was still alive at that time, and there are pictures of her and Trump embracing, okay? But yet he's supposedly a racist, right? The worst racist ever. He was friends with Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson and many black sports figures and black celebrities. When Jennifer Hudson's family was murdered, it was her mother, her brother, and her nephew were murdered in their home in Chicago due to the out-of-control violence of Chicago. Trump offered Jennifer Hudson and her family completely free, without any charges, room at the Trump International Hotel in downtown Chicago. They could have a suite of rooms for no charge for as long as they wanted to stay there, so that they would feel safe and not be threatened by whoever killed the other members of her family. But the guy's a racist, right? Jennifer Hudson's a black singer who actually sang at some Democratic Party thing, so much for gratitude, right? Trump offered her a suite of rooms in a 5-star luxury hotel and didn't charge her a penny. There are people who will sit there and say, oh, we know Trump is a racist because of how he treated his employees. That also is a load of nonsense, a load of garbage. You can go to Trump Tower or any Trump-owned building or golf course. You will see black people there working, and you ask them what they think of their boss. Every single employee of Donald Trump loves their boss. Well, maybe I'm misspeaking. Maybe I shouldn't say every single. There might be a handful here and there who hate their job and don't like him or whatever. But the majority of his employees stay with working for him for a long, long time because he's a great boss to work for. I was in the hospitality and hotel industry, and while I never met Donald Trump, I don't know him personally, I did work for him, and he's a great boss. The amazing thing with Donald Trump was when he would go into a building he owned, whether it be Trump Tower where he lived or one of his hotels, he knew every single name of everybody who worked in that building. Now, obviously, he knew he was going there, and some of them he probably remembered, and some of them he might have kind of looked up and said, okay, let's see who the doormen are and the bellmen are and the front desk clerks are. But he would walk in that hotel, and he didn't just brush past the doormen and brush past the bellmen and, just brush past these small people. He would go up, he would shake their hands, he would pat them on the back. He would tell them they're doing a good job. He would talk to them for a few minutes if he had the time, ask them how their day was going, ask them if they had any suggestions for improving their job or the hotel or the building. He truly treated these people with concern and interest. And now let me explain why Trump is unique in being that way. Well, he's not unique. There are other corporate owners that do that, but he's among the few that do that. When Donald Trump was a teenager, his father was a real estate developer too, and his father owned buildings and apartments. And in particular, he owned a set of garden apartments on Staten Island. They're actually Trump buildings on Staten Island where I grew up. And one of these garden apartment complexes, I'm not sure if Trump still owns it to this day, but at the time, Trump's father owned these garden apartments that were built in the 1940s called the Grimes Hill Apartments. They're beautiful apartments, right? They're luxury apartments in a luxury area of Staten Island where a lot of wealthy people live. There are people, if you go to that place, that have lived there a long time, lived there 40, 50 years, they'll tell you they remember young Donald Trump as a teenager mowing the grass and emptying the garbage, doing maintenance around the place, cleaning the grounds. People like to say, oh, Trump was born wealthy and he didn't earn his money. It was given to him and he grew up with a silver spoon. And well, that's from the outside looking in. Yeah, you would think that, but that's actually not true. Okay. Fred Trump, who was Trump's father, worked his way up. He wasn't wealthy. His family came here from Germany. Their last name was Drumpf, D-R-U-M-P-F, and they changed the name. They anglicized it to Trump, like Trump card, the highest suit in a game of bridge and whist and some other games. Fred Trump worked his way up. I don't think they were absolutely poor, but middle class, humble beginnings, and became a very wealthy man in real estate. Now, he put his son to work because he raised his son to have a good work ethic. And he wanted his son to understand what the people who would work for him have to go through. What the gardeners, what their job is like, what the maintenance men do. Okay, there was a practical point to this, not only for Donald Trump to be able to identify what these people at the bottom of the corporate ladder are doing and how important their jobs are, how they make life livable for the people that buy and rent these apartments. But as a real estate developer, it's important that you know how things get done, right? If you hire a contractor to do a job, it's in your interest as a real estate developer to learn how that job is done, to know how that job is done, to know how long it takes, know how much the materials cost, and what the procedure is for putting those materials in. Because if you do not know those things, you will get a shoddy job done by a crooked contractor who uses shoddy materials, overcharges you, doesn't do the job right, and the building suffers, right? The people that rent or buy the apartment suffers. So it's very, very important as a real estate developer, if you don't do the work yourself, like a lot of people who flip houses, they actually do their own home contracting. They do their own repairs and their own revitalization on these properties they buy. But if you don't do it yourself, you better know what's involved in doing it in order to be able to deal effectively with your contractors and your general contractors and your subcontractors. So you know what they're doing, and you can look and watch what they're doing, and you could say, no. You're not going to put that over on me. I know what these things cost. I know that you're doing that wrong. You're taking a shortcut instead of doing it the right way. You got to know these things. So Donald Trump learned these things because his dad made him work as a teenager into his 20s during his college years, doing these jobs, being on work sites, being right there when the builders were building things. I don't think Donald Trump did any actual building a building. That's all union organized. They wouldn't allow a teenage, especially after OSHA was passed in the 40s, they wouldn't allow for a teenager, unlicensed teenage non-union guy to come and do stuff on the building site. But was he there observing things and working with the architects and the engineers by his dad's side? Absolutely he was. Yes, Trump had the fortune of growing up to a wealthy dad, so the father put him through the best schools, right? Wharton Business School. He had a military school upbringing for his grammar schooling was all in a military school in upstate New York. So the idea that Trump is just this like wealthy, spoiled, rich boy who has no idea what the common man is like or what the needs of the common man are a crock of baloney, because Trump knows. Hey, Trump has seen it, witnessed it, done it, seen it. And that's why whenever he goes into one of his buildings, he shakes the hands of everybody that works there. It doesn't matter if they're the janitor or housekeeper that makes a bed, the doorman that opens the door, the bellman that carries the luggage, the front desk clerk that checks people in, security guy, whoever, however lowly their position is, Trump makes a point of, when he sees them, going over, shaking their hand, patting them on the back, showing that he's listening, showing that he cares, and asking them, is there anything he can do for them? Is there any way to improve his job, make his job more efficient? Because it's the people who do the job every day who encounter the problems and the hurdles in that job. And if there's a way to streamline, do that job efficiently, it saves the boss money, ultimately. So Trump wants to hear the housekeeper, the groundskeeper, the houseman, the doorman, the bellman, the front desk clerk. He wants to hear from these people. Tell me, how can this job be better? Better for you, so you're happier, and better for me, because it's getting done more efficiently, saves me money. Trump is also among some of the better payers in the hospitality industry. He follows the generally accepted amounts of pay and salary, but he tends to go a little bit above that. Not so much, I think, on the lower jobs like housekeepers and stuff, but the point is you don't want to overpay your housekeepers, because the idea is for them to move up, not to stay a housekeeper. Trump always encouraged his promotion from within. He would love nothing more to see a housekeeper become a supervisor, and then a manager, then the head of housekeeping, move into different areas, become a food and beverage manager, a hotel manager. He would very much encourage his employees to better themselves, whether it was to go to school or to learn other jobs or to strive to improve and get out of whatever job they're in. These images that Trump is somehow a tyrant, a spoiled rich boy, it's not true. But try to tell that to the media that hates him, and the people who, when you try to talk to them about the good things Trump has done, they stick their fingers in their ears and go, la, 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 I'm not listening. Trump is a fascist. You're a fool for believing him. You're brainwashed. They'll shout you down. They'll call you names. They'll do anything they can but listen with an open mind. They've already got their mind made up, because all of their friends and the news media and the entertainment media and the whole world around them and everything that they listen to tells them a story, and they don't have the intellectual curiosity. They're intellectually lazy and won't do the research to see if what they're hearing about Trump is not only true, or does it even make sense? If they just took a moment of critical thinking when they hear some outrageous story about Trump and said, wait a minute, does this make sense that this multimillionaire, billionaire real estate guy would do this thing, whatever that thing would be, or say this thing, whatever that thing may be that they claim he said? They took a moment of critical thinking, they'd see that this is nonsense, what they're hearing. But if they really went so far as to actually research it, and yes, there's a lot of garbage. You can research Trump, and there's still a lot of garbage against him. That's why I believe whenever you do any kind of research, whether it's historical, scientific, or otherwise, whenever you're going to do research on the internet, it's really, really important that you go to multiple sources and don't just buy Wikipedia either, because Wikipedia can be edited by all sorts of people that are members of it. Wikipedia is a good jumping off point. I use Wikipedia a lot daily, but I don't make that my only source for information. I use Wikipedia to get an idea of what it is I want to research and what I'm looking for, and then I use their references at the bottom where they show where they got a lot of the information from, or their bibliography. They might have a bibliography listing the documents, newspapers, books, publications, and so forth, TV shows, and wherever they got the info from. And I will then search those things. I recommend any historian or anybody doing any kind of research on the internet to do research with at least 3 verified independent sources, because there's a lot of parroting on the internet where one place says this, and then you go to some even legitimate sites like CNN or MSNBC or Yahoo News or any of these news outlets, some of them famous, respectable news outlets, and they're saying the same stupid thing because they didn't do their research. They just took the story from this rinky-dink, no-name operation that could have completely fabricated a story. And they say, oh, well, this fits the narrative we want, that Trump is an ogre and he's a tyrant and racist. Okay, you'll run with that. They don't do their due diligence in researching to see if it's true. So there's a lot of parroting. If you don't believe me that there's a lot of parroting, then I'll suggest you look up about 20 years ago, Dan Rather ran with a story on the CBS Evening News how George W. Bush was a draft dodger, that he joined the National Guard. I believe it was the Arkansas, or maybe it was probably the Texas National Guard. Yeah, it was Texas National Guard, to be a draft dodger, and that there were these documents where he admitted to such, and where letters were sent between his father, George H.W. Bush, and various politicians to get Georgie boy, the son, these cushy National Guard assignments instead of being drafted to go to Vietnam. And so Dan Rather ran with this story, and it turns out the documents that he was using as evidence to back up his story were fraudulently created. They were fiction. They weren't real. There was not a single shred of reality in them. They were written by some woman who hated George W. Bush. I can't remember her name at the moment, but they were completely written. They were basically fiction. And yet Dan Rather took them as true because this was his preconceived view of George W. Bush, and ran with the story. And it cost him his job at CBS Evening News. He left that place in shame and embarrassment. So if you don't believe that things get parroted, they get parroted. Another one is Brian Williams, right? He was on the NBC Evening News, and he used to talk about how he was in Beirut during the Gulf War, and he reported from there, and it turned out, oh no, he wasn't. He outright lied about being in a place where he claimed he was. Cost him his job at NBC Evening News. There was a guy in the New York Times, a reporter, that completely fabricated stories, and he did it for years and years and years until eventually he got found out. And the New York Times, which incidentally never printed any retractions or corrections that I know of, but they did fire him. But he had been doing that for years, handing in stories that he didn't actually do any research. There might have been a kernel of truth to start the story off, but then he wrote the rest of the story inventing people that he spoke to and interviewed that didn't exist, that he didn't actually interview, that witnesses that didn't exist, and so forth. So you cannot necessarily accept as what is gospel truth from anybody, even these so-called respectable mainstream sources. I mean, for the first 3 years of Trump's administration, you turned on the TV and all you heard was Russian collusion. That Trump won his election because the Russians interfered in the election, helped him out, and millions and millions and millions of dollars were spent funding an independent prosecutor named Robert Mueller, who Trump actually appointed, and he looked into it, and it was a nothing burger. There was really not much there. There was not really much. There was a few things that special prosecutor found, a few little inconsistencies, but there was absolutely no proof whatsoever of any collusion by Russia. Russia may have influenced the election. Okay, that's a possibility. But that's not what the Mueller report was about. The Mueller wasn't so much investigating Russian interference in the election as he was Russian collusion with the Trump camp in collusion. And there was nothing there. So millions and millions of dollars, and Adam Schiff and Jerry Nadler getting on TV going, we've got the proof, we've got the evidence. holding these hidden secret investigations that the Republicans weren't even allowed to attend, strictly Democrats only, where they had so much proof of Trump committing all these impeachable offenses, which was their justification for impeaching him the first time. It was a nothing burger. There was nothing there. When Trump was in office, he did a lot of good things. Our economy was swimming along from the day one. He rolled up his sleeves. He kept companies that were planning to move their factories overseas. He kept them in America. He lowered taxes. He lowered regulations, which regulations are basically a tax and a cross to bear on businesses, right? It hinders a business's ability to do things because they meet these regulations, which then drives the price of the items up. We had low unemployment. Okay, Trump was black unemployment was at its lowest since the FDR administration. Employment in general was the lowest it had been since, I think, the Kennedy administration. The racist Trump, right? He's such a racist, yet he got the Congress to pass a bill to repeal the 1993 crime bill that Joe Biden was a sponsor of, that put thousands, if not millions, of black people in jail for long sentences for minor offenses that were nonviolent offenses, like having a little bit of drugs on. And quite a few black people that had been in jail for decades were freed. And when they came to the White House and hugged Trump and thanked him for helping to get them released, didn't really even have to pardon them. There might have been a pardoning part of that, but he got them released, right? Yet, he's such a racist. And most of those people were black. I'm not saying that all criminals are black, but the people in particular who seem to have been rounded up by the 1993 crime bill were black. Now, I'd like to remind you at this point that, and I'll put the clip in, that the guy that sponsored that bill, one of the sponsors of it was Joe Biden, Senator Joe Biden of Delaware, who, in arguing in favor of that bill to become law, said this.
This is one of those issues I hope this passage of this bill will be taken out of the gridlock category and moved into an emerging consensus. And the consensus is as follows, and I will cease when I finish this statement. The consensus is A, we must take back the streets. It doesn't matter whether or not the person that is accosting your son or daughter or my son or daughter, my wife, your husband, my mother, your parents. It doesn't matter whether or not they were deprived as a youth. It doesn't matter whether or not they had no background that enabled them to become socialized into the fabric of society. It doesn't matter whether or not they're the victims of society. The end result is they're about to knock my mother on the head with a lead pipe, shoot my sister, beat up my wife, take on my sons. So I don't want to ask what made them do this. They must be taken off the street. There's a second thing that we all have agreed upon, and that is, unless we do something about that cadre of young people, tens of thousands of them, born out of wedlock, without parents, without supervision, without any structure, without any conscience developing, because they literally have not been socialized. They literally have not had an opportunity, for simple pragmatic reasons. If we don't, they will, or a portion of them will, become the predators 15 years from now. And Madam President, we have predators on our streets that society has, in fact, in part because of its neglect, created. They are beyond the pale, many of those people.
So what was Biden referring to when he talked about predators on the streets and people growing up who haven't been socialized, or growing up with single parents, no fathers, and so forth? Was he talking about blacks, or was he talking about white people? Well, he didn't really say either way, did he? But the implication there was he was referring to black people. That's the majority of fatherless homes and people that live in neighborhoods that have high crime rates. Black neighborhoods, which are generally crime-ridden, not because white people are going there committing crimes, but black on black crime. Or what about Biden's opinion on busing, right? When they were talking about integrating schools so that they could get black students better schools by busing them to white schools, or trying to improve the black schools by busing white students to the black schools to integrate the races, right? What did Biden have to say about that? Well, here's what he said. Unless we do something about this, my children are going to grow up in a jungle. The jungle being a racial jungle with tensions having built so high that it is going to explode at some point. We have got to make some move on this. Basically, he was saying he didn't want his children to go to a integrated school. In the 1970s, Joe Biden was a vocal opponent of busing as a means for desegregating public schools. So during a hearing on the issue, in congressional hearing in 1977, he made the comment that I just read about his children going into a racial jungle. And it makes one wonder, why did he choose the analogy of a jungle, right? He could have chosen any kind of an analogy, but he chose the word jungle, right? Because who lives in a jungle? Apes live in a jungle, wild animals live in a jungle, and blacks have a history of being called jungle bunnies by white racists. So it's clear to me that what Joe Biden is referring to when he used the word jungle is referring to black neighborhoods that are often crime-ridden with a very low income and very high poverty level. And later on in the 93 crime bill speech, which I played the clip to, you heard him talk about predators in those neighborhoods. But that's all conveniently overlooked when Joe Biden was running for president. Joe Biden has run for president at least 2 times that I can recall in 2 Democratic primaries, I forget which years, and he never made it out of the primaries because it was always Joe saying something stupid, or Joe lying about something, or Joe plagiarizing someone else's speech. He was always exposed as the fraud that he has always been, a pathological liar. So how was he able to get through the nomination process this time in 2020 and become the presumptive nominee? In fact, you would have thought they would have picked Hillary Clinton, except that Hillary Clinton failed and was bitter. They decided to go with someone else. Why did Joe Biden make the cut instead of Elizabeth Warren or Tulsi Gabbard? Or how come Bernie didn't get to be the nominee for the Democrats? Or, for that matter, or any of the other Democrats that were running? Well, let's look at Joe Biden. Clearly, he's senile at best. At worst, he's got Alzheimer's disease and dementia. The man can't string sentences together. Half the time, he doesn't know where he is. He's talking to people that don't exist. He's talking to air, thinking there are people there. He's referring to and calling up on stage dead Congress people. At one point, he thought his sister was his wife and his wife was his sister. He's really not fit to be president mentally, which is something they accused Trump of, right? When Trump was president, there was talk of invoking the 25th Amendment, which removes a president based on physical or mental unfitness. Well, why hasn't that been invoked on Joe Biden? Well, because Joe Biden is a Democrat. He's the progressive leftist guy that they want. In fact, Joe Biden wasn't even much of a leftist until recently. For most of his career, he was a milquetoast moderate Democrat, but all of a sudden, since Obama's term, where he was vice president under Obama, a guy that he called a very articulate and good-speaking black man, we ran against him in that primary. But ever since he's been the vice president for Obama, he's gone further and further and further left. And now Joe Biden is kind of like, everybody's got one of these stories in their family, right? Where grandma, grandpa gets old and they get senile and they need help, and somebody hires a lawyer, or they hire a lawyer who comes in and gets power of attorney and is supposed to help them manage their life and manage their finances, create a will, because they're getting older and they're mentally not all there, and so they need this external help. And then it turns out that the lawyer is some kind of shyster who gains control over the person's money and puts documents in front of the old person. And the old person says, "What is this?" And the lawyer's like, "Don't worry what that is. Just sign it. It's for It's for your benefit. And the lawyer winds up stealing the inheritance and stealing the money, negatively impacting the life of the client that he's supposed to be representing, right? Just don't worry what that paper is. Don't even read it. Just sign it. Just sign it. It's all good. That's kind of what they do to Joe Biden now. Just sign it. Don't worry about what it says. Just sign it. Who's really in control of the government? It's not Joe Biden, I can tell you that. He's surrounded by a lot of Obama appointees from when Obama was president 2 terms. And there's even a clip I'll play of Obama saying to a reporter, when a reporter asked if he had any regrets now that he's leaving the White House after 2 terms. And Obama said, yeah, wouldn't it be great? My only regret is, wouldn't it be great if I could have a 3rd term, like someone else could run and be the front man, but I would actually be the one running things?
I've said this before. People would ask me, knowing what you know now, do you wish like you had a 3rd term? And I used to say, you know what, if I could make an arrangement where I had a stand-in, a front man, or front woman, and they had an earpiece in, and I was just in my basement in my sweats, looking through the stuff, and then I could sort of deliver the lines, but somebody else was doing all the talking and ceremony. Wow. I'd be fine with that.
That's kind of what's going on now, okay, with all those Obama appointees, and the fact that Obama is the only president in U.S. history who moved only like 3 blocks away from the White House. Most of them go back to wherever they came from, whatever their hometown was. In this case, Obama's hometown was either Chicago, where he lived his adult life, or Hawaii, where he grew up. No, he moved 3 blocks away from the White House, the only president ever to do that. So clearly, Obama's got his 3rd term. And Joe Biden got the nomination because there was no way Obama could manipulate all the other Democrat candidates running for that nomination. But a guy like Joe Biden, who's senile, very easy to manipulate. You know, that's the thing. And then even after Trump got out of office, he left office, right? He lost the election, he left office, and they still tried to impeach him. You can't impeach somebody who's already left the office. See, but they were looking at the little piece of the 14th Amendment, the Clause 3, that says if a person's convicted of a crime, that they can't ever run for president. So that's why they impeached him, even though he was out of office. They figured if they could get this conviction to stick, well, that would disqualify him from being able to run for office. That's what all of these trials Trump is going through. That's what this is all about. They are trying to disqualify him from being able to run for office. It's not about any of the supposed things he's been indicted for, because all of those things are magnifying glass. Let's look in, for the obscure little tiny thing. They're things like Beria, who was the head of the KGB under Vladimir Lenin. Beria said to Lenin, or rather Stalin, he said to Stalin, you show me the man and I'll find the crime. They're Trump, no pun intended, trumped up charges. They went through obscure laws, or they deliberately misinterpreted law or broadened the scope of a law in order to indict Trump and try him. And the only reason for this, it's not about, they're very fond of saying, the Democrats and the leftist media, they're very fond of saying that no one's above the law. No one's above the law. Even the president's not above the law. Okay. Yeah, well, that applies only if you're a Republican or a conservative, because let's look at Joe Biden. Joe Biden's in office, and he's got ties to the Chinese Communist Party. He's got ties to Ukraine. His son, Hunter, who had no experience in gas or energy issues, was getting millions of dollars from a Ukrainian gas company called Burisma while Joe was vice president. He got something like $300 million. Hunter got $300 million from the Chinese Communist Party for some kind of consulting fees to something that he's not qualified to do. Why Hunter? Why Hunter Biden? Well, because Dad, Joe Biden, was in the White House. So, of course, He was a vice president. It was access they were paying for. And then there's the laptop that for the whole Trump administration and the election of 2020, there's the laptop, Hunter's laptop, that he forgot about and left in a computer repair store that 57, 60, whatever it was, FBI and CIA agents said this was Russian disinformation. And as soon as Joe Biden got elected, then all of a sudden now, oh, no, it's actual proof. It's true. All the stuff in the laptop is true. Well, it's too late now. See, had the media not had done its job of due diligence, instead of parroting these bullshit that, oh, this is Russian disinformation, you can't believe the laptop. No, everything in the laptop is accurate and true. And there are people that said if we had known about that laptop issue, we might not have voted for Biden. Yeah. So in that laptop and emails and texts, there's, Hunter complaining he has to kick 10% up to the big guy. Who's the big guy? His father. Joe Biden's brother was involved in some of these schemes with Hunter. Hunter, the coke addict who regularly used prostitutes, partied with prostitutes even though he's married, who denied the existence that a child that he fathered was even his. This is the guy that Joe Biden is proud of. This guy, even in text, complained about how to, I believe it was his sister, saying, well, at least you don't have to give half of your income to dad like I do. All of this is conveniently left out of the news media and forgotten about. And now there's these discoveries by yet another Biden who forgot something and left it somewhere. His daughter's diary, right? His daughter claims the diary was stolen. That's not the truth. Truth is she left it somewhere. Somebody found it, read it, and turned it over to conservative media, because if they turned it over to the regular mainstream media, they would have burned it and you heard nothing of it. But what do we hear in that diary? We hear that she was sexualized at a young age, that she was molested as a young age, even though she can't remember who it was doing the molesting. Victims of sexual abuse very often black out or have mental blocks that prevent them from remembering who did it. But the most glaring thing that came out is her father used to shower with her. No father should be showering with his daughter. I don't care if his daughter is a baby or his daughter is a teenager, a preteen, or a grown woman. A father should not be showering with his daughter. That's completely inappropriate. And even if you think, well, that's bullshit, that's not true. Well, okay, let's look at the way Joe Biden acts in public appearances. He's always standing very close, uncomfortably close to children, to little girls, sniffing their hair, touching their shoulders. And very often you could see the looks on the faces of these girls, how creeped out and uncomfortable they feel. I'm not going to say Joe Biden's a pedophile, although I think he is, but there's something a little bit off, a little bit creepy about Joe Biden when it comes to female adolescents, right? And now we hear that he showered with his daughter. And when you shower, you're naked. So don't tell me he went in there with his clothes on and she showered with her clothes on. That's nonsense. Where is that? Media's not talking about that. Guys, in fact, they impeached Donald Trump over a 5-page phone call with Vladimir Zelensky when he was reelected. That I read the 5 pages. I got them. If any of you want to see them, just contact me by my email, which I'll give later, and I'll send it to you. I was going to college at the time, and I passed them out to students, majority of whom are progressive and don't like Trump. And I told them I would pay them $100 if they could find anything in there that was impeachable. $100 to a student is a lot of money, even today. And no one took me on the offer. No one came to me and said, here's the proof, give me my 100. I didn't have it to give them either, because I knew nobody was going to find anything if they looked. There was nothing at all in that. They accused Trump in that trial of using foreign aid money as a lever or to extort Zelensky to get dirt on Joe Biden to investigate the Biden family. That was basically the whole point of the impeachment. There's nothing in this 5-page call that lasted all of maybe 20, 30 minutes. The only mention of Biden in that 5-page transcript of the call, is that Trump said, yeah, I heard that Joe Biden got this prosecutor fired who was prosecuting and investigating his son Hunter. And Zelensky was like, yeah, that happened. And Trump's like, well, maybe you should look into that. And if you have any information, feel free to, work with my Justice Department. We'll give you help investigating that if you need it. That's not anywhere near that. If you don't do what I tell you, you're not getting the money. Oh, who said that? Oh, yeah, that's right. Joe Biden's on tape when he was vice president going to Ukraine with the president at the time, that if he didn't fire the prosecutor who was investigating his son, Hunter Biden, that he'd make sure that Ukraine wouldn't get any of the aid money. And Joe Biden, with a smile on his face, crowed about this at some event where he was speaking on stage to an audience, crowed about how I told him he's not going to get the money. Sure enough, he didn't get the money.
I remember going over convincing our team, or others too, convincing us that we should be providing for loan guarantees. And I went over for, I guess, the 12th, 13th time to Kyiv, and I was supposed to announce that there was another $1 billion loan guarantee. And I had gotten a commitment from Poroshenko and from Yatsenyuk that they would take action against the state prosecutor, and they didn't. So they said they were walking out to press conference. I said, no, I said, I'm not going to, or we're not going to give you the $1 billion. They said, you have no authority. You're not the president. The president said. I said, call him. I said, I'm telling you, you're not getting the $1 billion. I said, you're not getting the $1 billion. I'm going to be leaving here. And I think it was, 6 hours? I said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money. Well, son of a bitch. Got fired. And they put in place someone who was solid.
How come Joe Biden hasn't been impeached? That's a clear violation. Well, you can't impeach him now because, well, he was vice president when he did that. Obama was president. But to me, if anybody deserves to be impeached, it's Biden. Biden has openly done things that are akin to, that would probably fall under the RICO Act, which was created for organized crime. The Chinese Communist Party funded Joe Biden's office in the University of Pennsylvania. Joe Biden had like some school or office there or something, some program there, which of course had illegal documents stored there. Although, you would think that, I love how they went after Trump, who was president, over illegal documents, and Trump as president had the right to declassify any document he wanted to declassify. Yet Vice President Joe Biden, who did not have the power to declassify anything, but stole or took out of the White House top secret classified documents and stored them in his garage next to his Corvette that his son Hunter Biden very often drove with his prostitute girlfriends, and had boxes of them inappropriately stored in an unlocked closet in his office that was built and funded by the Chinese Communist Party. Yet why is there no impeachment of Joe Biden? So here it is now. Joe Biden's been president 4 years. He's completely screwed the pooch. He's completely ruined the economy. The inflation's is higher than it's ever been in the United States. They like to trumpet that, the inflation's only like 8%. Well, or even less. Now I think they're saying it's 3%. Well, I got news for you. Any clever accountant can take numbers and manipulate them in a way to get whatever result he wants. And I can most assuredly tell you that from the average person, and I'm an average person, that I go shopping, there's no way the inflation is only 3%. I paid more than $3 for a 20-ounce bottle of soda last night in CVS. A soda that a year ago was about $2 or $2.25, and a few years before that was $1.75. Now it's well over $3. If you do the math on that alone, that percentage of increase from about a year ago when it was $2.25 to $3.20 now, when they trumpet out these inflation statistics, they're leaving out the cost of housing, rent. They're leaving out fuel costs, gas prices, price for home heating fuel. They're leaving out a lot of categories that would make the inflation rate look what it truly is, which is probably closer to 19 or 20%, if not more. No impeachment. His withdrawal from Afghanistan was an unmitigated disaster. People falling off of planes that they were hanging on to try to get out of that place, leaving $800 million or $600 billion, whatever it is, dollars worth of high-tech military equipment. So the Taliban now has it, allowing Iran to unfreezing all of the assets that were being held frozen, so that now Iran not only has a nuclear weapon, but they can fund Hamas and Hezbollah to commit all these atrocities. Okay, this war in Israel that Hamas is fighting versus Israel is directly funded by Iran, and they wouldn't have had the money to fund it except that Joe Biden, authorized payments to them and unfroze their accounts, so they had access to financial means. When Trump was president, North Korea didn't fire off a single rocket, and in fact, Trump was manipulating Kim Jong-un, talking to him peacefully, because this is what you got to do. As a businessman, sometimes you have to negotiate with people you don't like, and as president, the same thing. You have to negotiate with corrupt, evil leaders and people you don't like. There was positive events that came out of Trump's meetings with Kim Jong-un. They were actually thinking of dismantling the no-go zone on the 38th parallel between North and South Korea at one point. Trump got the Abraham Accords, where all the Arab nations around Israel agreed to be peace with Israel and have diplomatic relations and trade with Israel, something that should have earned Trump the Nobel Peace Prize, but he wasn't even nominated. No, they gave the Peace Prize to some woman that did some nonsense that really wasn't that important, whereas Trump brought peace to the Middle East, and he didn't even get nominated, as opposed to Obama, who got the Nobel Peace Prize for doing nothing the minute he got in the office. And then I'm supposed to believe the media is not biased, that the news media and entertainment media is not biased. For decades, they knew what Harvey Weinstein was doing. What Harvey Weinstein did has been going on in Hollywood since 1918, when Universal opened its first movie studio. It's nothing new. This casting couch is something every famous actresses had to deal with, particularly Marilyn Monroe and Judy Garland. Judy Garland was raped when she was 16 by one of the owners of MGM, one of the producers, when she was working on The Wizard of Oz. She was doped up on all kinds of stimulants and pills and outright sexually abused and raped. So this is something that's gone on for a long time. Yet all of a sudden, while Trump's in office, out comes the Me Too movement, and all these Hollywood actresses who now have made it are standing there with tears flowing going, I felt used and I was sexually abused. And my answer to you is, I feel sorry for you, but tough shit. Because when Harvey Weinstein or any other producer tried to do that stuff to you, you could have slapped them in the face and walked out. You were willing to go along with it. I don't think any of these women were actually brutally raped where the person beat them up. It was more of like date rape, like pressure put on them. You consented to this stuff to get parts, get jobs, and I'm not supporting that. I'm not saying that that's right. I mean, they shouldn't have done that, but you accepted it, okay? And now that you're famous and you're a big star and you don't have to go on that casting couch anymore, how utterly disingenuous is it that you're turning around now with tears coming out of your eyes talking about how this affected you? All I wanted to try to say is that this Trump prosecution stuff is nonsense. It's not anywhere near or akin to what Boss Tweed went through. And if you do your research and don't just swallow whatever the mainstream media feeds you about Trump, if you actually do your research, you'll see the nonsense that is this stuff. Rachel Maddow crying on air about Trump. Joe Scarborough ranting and raving like a lunatic about Trump. And they're losing. Trump is more popular now than when he ran the first time, and even more popular than when he ran the second time. I don't even want to get into the election fraud, because that's a podcast for another day. But he was more popular when he left office running for his second term than he was when he going into it. And now, thanks to the Democrats and all their dirty tricks and all these prosecutions, Trump is even more popular than that. He's probably going to win, assuming they don't outright cheat and steal the election again. He will win re-election as president. They have themselves to blame, because instead of trumping the good things that Joe Biden has done, which are non-existent. Clearly, Joe Biden is cognitively declined, so they're obfuscating, covering up for Joe Biden by trying to focus on Trump, and all they're doing is making Trump look like a martyr. He's become more popular now than ever before it was in history. Joe Biden has the lowest approval ratings since they've been keeping approval ratings. I think it's been 100 years that they've been doing this presidential approval rating stuff, and Joe Biden's got the lowest one, even lower than Jimmy Carter. Joe Biden clearly now has won the distinction, the noble distinction of being the worst president in U.S. history, or at least in the 20th century. Maybe not the worst in U.S. history, but clearly the worst in the 20th century. And the funny part is Joe Biden's approval rating is somewhere, I don't know, around 30%. People think he's doing a good job. I'd like to talk with those people. Where the hell are you living that you think Joe Biden is doing a great job here? I mean, this is ridiculous. I mean, just look around. Get out of your ivory tower and see the suffering that's out there. See the millions and millions and millions of migrants coming over an unprotected southern border. I live in New York City, and they're all over the place. They're laying everywhere in the streets. They came here looking for a better life for themselves and their families, and what they're finding is that there are no jobs, and they're living in welfare hotels, and they're living on the streets, homeless and starving, and they didn't find the American dream they came here for. Yet now they're stuck here, and they have no way of really getting back unless we deport them. They're finding out that they had this image of America as like the streets are paved with gold and everything's going to be so much better, and they're finding that that's not true. These African immigrants that came over the southern border, I see them. Most of them are from Senegal. I see them every day on the streets. They're collecting cans to try to survive. The Democrats cannot point to any single positive accomplishment Joe Biden has made. And so instead, we're going to prosecute Trump and try to get him disqualified. And if we can't get him disqualified, then we're going to shoot him down and call them all the names. Like they keep doing the same things over and over again that they did in 2020 and even 2016. Like Einstein said, the definition of crazy is trying to do the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. Oh, and they like to talk about Trump. I think one of the trials, the one in Georgia, is about election interference, right? Because they claim that because on January 6th, that he made a speech where he encouraged his supporters to fight, not physically, literally fight, but to go down there and protest. And that's another whole podcast. I'll talk about January 6th, but not now. Because he did that he was somehow interfering with the election. Well, I remember 4 years before that, when Trump won the election in 2016, you can find a video of a whole lot of Hollywood celebrities shooting a video that they sent to all the electors, who are the people that after you vote, you're actually not voting for the president. You're voting for a slate of electors that are committed to a particular candidate. So the Republican, when you vote for Donald Trump, you're voting for Donald Trump's electors that are appointed by the local Republican Party in the districts. You're not voting for Trump. You're voting for his electors that will then vote for Trump when they meet with the Electoral Congress, when they meet in Washington on January 6th every year. They put out these celebrities in 2016 and in 2017 after the election was over. And the election was November of 2016, but they put this out. They put this video out in the end of 2016 going into 2017, literally begging the electors to become faithless electors. A faithless elector is an elector who is committed to vote for their candidate. In this case, a Trump elector has signed a paper saying that he or she is committed to voting for Donald Trump when the Electoral Congress meets. A faithless elector is somebody who does that, but then doesn't vote for the candidate they said they were committed to voting for, and they vote for the other guy. So if a Trump delegate, as they're called, or I'm sorry, not delegate, but Trump elector who committed to voting for Trump at the Electoral Congress meeting turns around and votes for Hillary Clinton instead, that's a faithless elector. And so they were begging these Trump electors to, in their words, do the right thing and become faithful electors and elect Hillary Clinton over the will of the people, right? Because, yeah, they like to say Hillary Clinton got more of the popular vote, and that may be true, but you got to remember that's not what gets the president elected. It's the number of electoral votes in the various states, and I'll do a whole podcast explaining the Electoral College, because every time it goes against the Democrats, the first thing you hear is, oh, we need to abolish the Electoral College. We need to get rid of this system. It needs to be based on popular vote. I'll do a podcast, maybe the next one, on the Electoral College, why the Founding Fathers set the election for president up that way, and what would happen if you abolished it, if you could abolish it. It would take an amendment to the Constitution to abolish it. It's not something you could, like Congress could just say, no more Electoral College, and that's it. It's written into the Constitution. The only way you change anything written in the Constitution is with an amendment. And I doubt very much that they would get that amendment to pass for abolishing the Electoral College. Because in almost every case, it's helped the Republicans win. Thanks for listening to the podcast and sticking with me. I'm glad that you took the time to have a slice of Bennett's life with me, Bennett's Slice of Life, and I look forward to the next time we meet to have a slice of life. Thank you for sticking with me. These podcasts are going to get better and better, and if you want to really show me some love, please like and share the podcast. It's on Spotify, it's on iHeartRadio, on Podbean, on other major streaming sites for podcasts. And if you really want to help me out, I'd appreciate it if you could donate money to me to help me get equipment and keep these podcasts going. Because right now I'm doing this without any advertising ads on my podcast, without any advertising revenue. So, if you can help me out by donating some money, I appreciate it. If you wish to do that, I'm on Venmo. My Venmo account is at Robert-Bennett-402. That's at Robert with a capital R, dash Bennett with a capital B, dash 402. I also have Cash App, which is cash.app/$ ROBBENN 514. And my PayPal is paypal.me/Robert Bennett 514. If you can help me out, it's greatly appreciated. And if you wish to reach me, you can contact me at robbenn69@Yahoo. That's ROBBENN69@Yahoo. Thank you again for listening, and I look forward to seeing you. Be safe, be well, and keep striving to be better.